There comes a time when you look at your life and realize something has to change, not tomorrow, not next week. Now, you're pouring yourself into people, situations, and conversations, but the connection feels shallow, strained, or worse. Silent, sound familiar, self-awareness is your superpower. It's not loud or flashy. It doesn't need validation or attention, but it changes everything. Quietly, powerfully, and permanently. The moment you begin to understand yourself is the moment the world begins to shift around you. Most people go through life on autopilot, reacting instead of responding, defending instead of reflecting. But when you truly know who you are, you stop being controlled by your circumstances. You stop needing everyone to understand you. You stop shrinking to fit in or stretching yourself to please. You simply exist as yourself, and that is power. Think about how much conflict comes from misunderstanding, not just with others, but within yourself. You say yes when you want to say no. You smile when you feel broken. You keep the peace on the outside while battling chaos on the inside. Why? Because you've been taught to perform, to survive, to blend in. But self-awareness calls you out. It says, no more pretending. It forces you to sit with the truth of who you are, even when that truth is messy, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it challenges everything you thought you believed. This power doesn't come overnight. It's not something you wake up with. It's built through honesty, through observation, through stillness. It's born in moments when you pause and ask, why did that trigger me? Or what am I really feeling? That inner curiosity. That's the first spark, and when you start asking those questions consistently, everything begins to shift. You realize your anger is often sadness in disguise. Your silence is fear dressed up as strength. Your perfectionism is insecurity wearing a mask. Suddenly, your patterns make sense, and when they make sense, they can be changed. Self-awareness allows you to own your story, all of it, the good, the broken, the in progress. It gives you permission to stop performing and start evolving. Because once you see yourself clearly, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to blaming everyone else. You can't pretend that you don't know better. You begin to take responsibility, not in a way that shames you, but in a way that frees you, because now you're in control, not the trauma, not the environment, not the opinions of others, you. It also strengthens your ability to connect. When you're self-aware, you're not just living from the surface, you're tuned in. You can sense energy. You recognize when someone else is projecting or avoiding, and instead of taking it personally, you understand it's not about you. You become less reactive and more intentional. You stop needing to be right and start being real. You communicate with clarity. You forgive faster, not because people deserve it, but because you refuse to carry what's not yours. You become safer to others because you are now safe within yourself. But self-awareness doesn't just change how you relate to others, it changes how you pursue your goals. You stop chasing what looks good and start pursuing what feels right. You stop comparing your timeline to everyone else's. You stop measuring your worth by how much you produce or how much you're praised. You begin to define success on your own terms. You realize your energy is your most valuable asset, and you protect it with everything you've got. You no longer allow distractions to detour your direction. Even your failures look different when you're self-aware. Instead of letting them define you, you let them teach you. You stop avoiding mistakes and start extracting wisdom. You ask, what is this trying to show me about myself? That question alone can unlock everything, because self-awareness turns every obstacle into an opportunity for growth. You no longer waste time pretending. You no longer run from discomfort. You meet yourself right where you are, and you build from there. The most powerful people aren't the ones who control others. They're the ones who have learned to lead themselves. To sit with their darkness, to recognize their patterns, to know when to pause, when to push, and when to pivot. That's not something you can fake. It comes from deep, unshakable awareness, the kind that no one can give you and no one can take away. And if you've been waiting for someone to tell you that you're allowed to trust your own intuition, that you're allowed to evolve, that you're allowed to be more than the version of yourself others are comfortable with, here it is. Self-awareness is not the final destination. It's the foundation. It's where true strength begins, where healing begins, where transformation begins. Master your emotions before managing others. It's a truth many ignore but inevitably face. The people who seem calm under pressure, steady in chaos, and grounded during conflict, those aren't people without emotion. They're people who have learned the discipline of emotional control. They've learned how to check in with themselves before reacting to the world. Because until you learn to lead yourself internally, you'll always be ruled externally, by triggers, by people, by outcomes you can't control. The mistake many make is thinking that emotions are something to suppress. But real mastery isn't about shutting your feelings down. It's about understanding them. It's about being able to say, I'm angry right now, but I don't have to lash out. Or I'm anxious, but I don't need to let that control my decisions. Emotions are messengers, not dictators. They signal where healing is needed, where boundaries are weak, or where past pain is still lingering. When you learn to sit with your emotions without judgment or denial, you gain insight, you gain control. And that control allows you to respond with wisdom instead of react with regret. Imagine trying to lead, support, or advise someone while your own internal world is in chaos. That's what happens when we try to manage others without first managing ourselves. You can't pour calm into someone else if you're carrying anxiety. You can't teach peace if you're constantly battling inner war. When you master your emotions, your presence becomes a place of safety for others. You don't have to say much. Your energy speaks for you. People feel when you're centered, they trust it, they lean into it, because calm is contagious. The challenge is that most people were never taught emotional regulation. Many of us grew up in environments where anger was loud, sadness was silent, and joy was fleeting. We learned to hide, deny, or numb how we felt, and those patterns followed us into adulthood. But mastery doesn't come from repetition, it comes from interruption. You must be willing to unlearn, to pause before the outburst, to breathe before the breakdown, to question your own assumptions even when they feel justified. Think about the last time you lost your temper. What did it cost you? A relationship, an opportunity, your peace, and was it worth it? More often than not, we regret the moments when we let emotion lead without direction. But that doesn't mean emotion is the enemy, it just means it needs a guide. That guide is awareness. When you begin to notice your emotional triggers, what sets you off, what shuts you down, you reclaim your power, you realize, I'm not at the mercy of this moment, I have a choice. It's also important to remember that emotional mastery isn't about being stoic. It's not about pretending to be unaffected. It's about feeling deeply, but not drowning in the feeling. It's about honoring your emotion without handing it the steering wheel. You can cry and still lead. You can grieve and still function. You can be disappointed and still show up with grace. That's strength, that's control, that's leadership. And when it comes to others, the impact of your emotional mastery becomes undeniable. People mirror energy. If you show up frantic, defensive, or tense, it spreads. If you show up steady, present, and clear, it settles the room. You become the thermostat, not the thermometer. You set the emotional tone instead of reacting to it. That's when you stop being controlled by your environment and start influencing it. There's also power in being able to separate your emotion from your identity. Feeling fear doesn't mean you're weak. Feeling anger doesn't make you dangerous. Feeling hurt doesn't make you broken. These are human emotions, not life sentences. When you stop judging what you feel, you make space to understand it. And once you understand it, you can communicate it. You can say, right now I'm feeling overwhelmed and I need a moment, or I'm upset but I don't want to say something I'll regret. That kind of emotional intelligence builds trust. It creates space for honest conversations and healthier relationships. So when people ask what it takes to be a strong leader, a loving partner, a loyal friend, the answer isn't always strategy or skill. It's emotional control. It's knowing yourself so well that no one else can shake your foundation. It's learning to master the inner world before trying to manage the outer one. Because if your emotions are in chaos, your relationships will feel it, your decisions will reflect it, your life will absorb it. But when you lead yourself with intention, everything around you rises to meet that standard. True connection demands vulnerability. Not the surface-level type that looks polished and presentable, but the raw, unfiltered truth that reveals who you really are beneath the masks. Connection is never built on perfection. It's born from honesty. Yet most people are walking around guarded, performing, hiding behind curated versions of themselves, wondering why they still feel so alone. You can have the perfect conversation, the flawless timing, even shared interests, but without vulnerability, it all stays shallow. You can't bond deeply with someone if you're too busy protecting yourself from being seen. Vulnerability feels risky because it is. It asks you to open up without a guarantee that the other person will understand, respect, or reciprocate. It means saying, "This is who I really am," even when you're not sure how it will be received. But the alternative, pretending, withholding, editing yourself to be more digestible, is far more damaging in the long run. It keeps relationships on autopilot, full of assumptions and distance. It creates a life where you're surrounded by people, but still starving for closeness. Because closeness doesn't come from being perfect, it comes from being real. We are conditioned to believe that strength looks like having it all together, but some of the strongest moments in life are the ones when you choose to say, "I'm not okay right now," or "I don't have the answers," or "I need help." Vulnerability is strength in its rawest form. It doesn't need armor. It doesn't ask for applause. It just asks for honesty, the courage to be seen for who you are, even if it's messy, complicated, or in progress. When you allow yourself to be vulnerable, you give others permission to do the same. It becomes a mirror. You say, "Here's my truth," and suddenly someone else feels safe enough to share theirs. That's how healing happens. That's how intimacy is formed. It's not the easy conversations that bring people closer. It's the brave ones. The ones where you risk rejection in exchange for authenticity. The ones where silence is broken and walls are torn down. But vulnerability isn't just about expressing your feelings. It's also about receiving someone else's truth without judgment. It's about creating a space where others don't feel like they have to shrink, perform, or impress. You have to be willing to listen without fixing, to hold space without trying to take control. Vulnerability invites presence. It calls for you to just be with someone, not do something about them. Many people mistake vulnerability for weakness because they associate it with crying or breaking down. But vulnerability can be quiet. It can look like telling someone you love them first. It can sound like admitting when you were wrong. It can feel like sitting in silence with someone instead of rushing to fill the air. These small acts of emotional courage build trust, bit by bit, moment by moment. And yes, vulnerability can hurt. Sometimes you'll open up and people won't meet you there. Sometimes you'll be honest and get misunderstood. That's the cost of being real, but you cannot form deep, meaningful connections without risking a little pain. Emotional safety isn't found, it's built. And vulnerability is the foundation of that safety. It's how you say, "I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to connect with you." True connection doesn't care about how curated your life looks. It doesn't care about your resume, your follower count, or your accolades. It cares about your soul. It cares about your truth. It wants to know the stories behind your scars, not just your successes. It wants to sit with your questions, not just celebrate your answers. That kind of connection doesn't just fill the room, it fills the heart. And the beauty of vulnerability is this: once you stop hiding, you start attracting. The right people won't run from your honesty. They'll respect it. They'll lean into it. You'll no longer have to beg to be understood because you'll start speaking the language of your own truth. And the people meant for you will speak it back. So if you're tired of surface-level conversations and empty interactions, maybe it's time to show up differently. Maybe it's time to be brave enough to go deeper. Vulnerability won't protect you from pain, but it will protect you from loneliness, because nothing connects people more deeply than being seen, heard, and loved in the places they thought they had to hide. Boundaries build respect, not walls to keep people out, but lines that define where you begin and where others end. They're not punishment, they're protection. They're not selfish, they're essential. The way people treat you is often a reflection of what you've allowed, and without boundaries, you invite chaos, confusion, and resentment into spaces where there should be clarity and care. Boundaries are not just for others, they are for you. They remind you of your worth, your values, and your limits. They teach the world how to interact with you, and they teach you how to honor your own needs without guilt. So many people avoid setting boundaries because they fear being seen as rude, distant, or difficult. But being constantly available, constantly agreeable, and constantly drained is not kindness, it's self-abandonment. The people who truly respect you will not be offended by your limits, they will adjust or they will reveal themselves. Either way, clarity is a gift. When you start showing up with stronger boundaries, people may react, but let them be uncomfortable, let them be surprised. That discomfort is not your responsibility to manage. It's the growing pain of respect being built. Boundaries don't require drama. You don't need to yell, explain endlessly, or overcompensate. A simple no can be powerful. A quiet exit can be louder than a loud confrontation. You don't owe access to anyone who drains your energy, disrespects your time, or manipulates your kindness. Your time is valuable. Your peace is priceless. Your energy is limited. Boundaries help you protect what truly matters before it's emptied out for people who don't appreciate it. When you lack boundaries, you start confusing exhaustion with loyalty. You start believing that proving your love means overextending yourself. But love that demands your burn out isn't love, it's control. And respect that only exists when you're convenient isn't respect, it's convenience. Boundaries filter out those who are only around for what they could take. They reveal who's there for the real you, not the version that bends until it breaks. You don't have to justify your boundaries to anyone. You don't have to provide evidence for your no or over-explain your silence. People who expect your availability 24/7 aren't looking for connection. They're looking for control. People who get angry when you set a boundary were benefiting from your lack of one. It's not your job to make them comfortable. It's your job to be responsible with your emotional, mental, and physical space. Boundaries aren't just about saying no to others. They are about saying yes to yourself, yes to rest, yes to peace, yes to values, yes to goals, yes to protecting the version of yourself you are working so hard to become. When you set a boundary, you don't push people away. You make space for the right ones to come closer. People who honor your limits are people who are capable of building real, healthy, mutual relationships. Learning to set boundaries is a process. It takes courage. It takes unlearning old patterns that taught you to equate love with sacrifice. It takes relearning that you are not responsible for everyone's comfort, happiness, or expectations. You are responsible for showing up in truth, in strength, and in self-respect. That's how you create balance. That's how you protect your capacity. That's how you stop betraying yourself just to keep the peace. Sometimes the hardest boundaries are the ones you have to set with yourself. The discipline to not go back to someone who consistently violates your peace. The strength to walk away even when you're still emotionally attached. The awareness to catch your own patterns of people, pleasing or over-explaining. Setting boundaries with others begins by practicing boundaries within. You teach people how to treat you by how you treat yourself. If you constantly ignore your own limits, so will they. And yes, there will be moments when setting a boundary feels like loss, like disappointment, like distance, but in the long run, it creates room for something better. Healthier, more aligned. Boundaries don't ruin relationships. They refine them. They separate the ones who deserve a seat at your table from the ones who are just passing through. Boundaries are love in action. For yourself and for others, they are the invisible lines that protect your capacity to show up whole, to give freely without resentment, to exist without being consumed. They're not easy, but they're necessary. They are the foundation of mutual respect, and they are the beginning of real freedom, because when you start honoring your boundaries, you start living from a place of strength, not survival. Listen to understand. It sounds simple, but it is one of the most powerful and rarest acts in human connection. Most people don't listen to understand, they listen to respond. They're forming replies before the other person even finishes a sentence. They're defending, debating, assuming, correcting. They hear words, but not the heart behind them. They catch the surface, but miss the soul, and that's why so many conversations lead to conflict, not clarity. Listening to understand requires patience, humility, and the willingness to let go of the need to be right. True listening is not about agreement, it's about presence. It's about choosing to put your ego on pause long enough to fully enter someone else's experience. When you listen to understand, you're not trying to win a conversation. You're trying to connect through it. You're not rushing to prove your point. You're slowing down to make space for someone else's truth. That level of listening is healing. It says, I see you, I hear you, you matter. And in a world where everyone's rushing to be heard, being truly heard can feel like love. Most misunderstandings don't happen because people communicate poorly. They happen because people aren't truly listening. They filter what's being said through their own emotions, assumptions, and biases. They're so caught up in how the message lands on them that they miss what's actually being said. Listening to understand is about setting those filters aside. It's about asking, what is this person really trying to express? It's about tuning into tone, body language, and the emotion between the lines. Sometimes it's not the words themselves, but what's not being said that carries the real message. Listening like this requires emotional intelligence. You have to be willing to hold space for someone else's perspective, even when it challenges your own. You have to resist the urge to interrupt, fix, or shift the focus back to yourself. You have to be okay with silence, with not having all the answers, with simply being present, and that presence alone can be more powerful than any advice you could ever give. Because when someone feels seen and understood, healing begins without a single solution offered. When you listen to understand, you learn more than you ever would by talking. You begin to see the world through different eyes. You develop empathy. You expand your capacity for compassion. You stop assuming intent and start seeking context. And in doing so, you create deeper, more meaningful relationships. Trust is built not through how much you say, but through how well you listen. Respect grows in the quiet spaces where someone feels safe enough to be honest. Listening doesn't require agreement, but it does require attention. It's easy to say, I hear you, while scrolling your phone or planning your next sentence. But people can feel the difference between being heard and being truly listened to. They know when you're engaged and when you're just waiting for your turn to speak. Listening to understand is about giving the gift of your full presence. No distractions, no agendas, just an open mind and an open heart. It's also worth noting that listening to understand doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. You can set boundaries while still holding space. You can say, I want to understand you, but I also need to feel safe in this conversation. Listening is not submission, it's strength. It's a conscious choice to lead with curiosity instead of control. And it changes the tone of every interaction. When you start listening this way, you realize how often people are just trying to be heard. They're not always looking for solutions. Sometimes they just need to vent, to grieve, to be validated, to hear someone say, I get it. That sounds hard. In those moments, your silence, your nod, your I'm here means more than 1,000 words. Listening to understand can transform arguments into conversations and distance into closeness. It de-escalates tension. It dissolves assumptions. It reminds people they're not alone in their experience. And in a noisy world where everyone is talking, being the person who listens deeply is a rare and invaluable gift. Not just to others, but to yourself. Because when you really start listening, you begin to see people, relationships, and even yourself in an entirely new way. The way you treat yourself sets the standard for others. People are always watching, consciously or not, how you value yourself. They observe what you tolerate, how you speak about yourself, how you care for your body, your boundaries, your time, and your emotional well-being. And based on those cues, they learn how to treat you. You can't expect someone to honor what you continuously abandon in yourself. You can't expect them to speak gently to you when you speak harshly to yourself. What you allow becomes your message. What you prioritize becomes your mirror. It all starts with you. So many people wait for someone else to treat them with kindness, to see their worth, to offer love, patience, or respect. But here's the truth. If you're constantly neglecting yourself, giving yourself away in pieces, or criticizing every move you make, you're silently teaching others to do the same, and it isn't about blame, it's about awareness. Because self-treatment is powerful. It's the foundation. It's the first voice that shapes every relationship you will ever have. If you want better from others, it must begin with what you demand and deliver to yourself. Self-respect doesn't come from what you say, it comes from what you do. It's shown in the small daily choices. Do you speak up when something feels wrong, even if your voice shakes? Do you take rest when you're tired, or do you guilt yourself into burnout? Do you keep promises to yourself or only to others? Do you stand by your values or compromise them to keep the peace? These aren't just habits, these are standards. They're the invisible framework that shapes how others perceive your value. If you constantly overextend yourself to be liked, you will attract people who only love you when you're giving. If you settle for being an option instead of a priority, you will continue to feel like an afterthought. If you hide your true self to fit in, don't be surprised when no one truly knows you. It all goes back to how you treat yourself when no one's watching. That's the energy people pick up on. That's the silent language they respond to. People don't treat you better than you treat yourself. They treat you the way they see you treating you. When you show up for yourself, others feel that. When you protect your peace, it sends a message. When you stop laughing at jokes that hurt you or stop engaging in dynamics that drain you, you reclaim power, and power doesn't have to be loud. It can be quiet, firm, rooted in self-awareness and self-worth. You don't have to yell to set a boundary. You just have to honor your limits consistently. You don't have to demand respect. You just have to stop entertaining what disrespects you. When you treat yourself with love, with care, with dignity, you stop accepting the bare minimum from people. You stop negotiating your worth for scraps of attention or affection. You create a standard, and that standard speaks louder than any words ever could. This doesn't mean you won't have moments of struggle. It doesn't mean you won't make mistakes or have days where you fall short, but even in those moments, how you respond to yourself matters. Do you extend grace or guilt? Do you pick yourself up with compassion or tear yourself down with shame? Self-kindness is not a weakness. It's strength, it's resilience. It's the anchor that holds you steady when life gets heavy. And as you treat yourself better, everything begins to shift. Your relationships become more aligned. Your environment begins to reflect your inner growth. You attract people who see and value you not because you need them to, but because you've already shown them how. You become less afraid of letting people go because you've stopped abandoning yourself to keep others around. The truth is, the world takes its cue from you. The tone you set in your inner dialogue, the way you show up in your daily choices, the way you carry yourself, all of it creates a blueprint. And the more you raise your standard in how you treat yourself, the more the world rises to meet it. Because people can only give you what you believe you deserve, and that belief starts with how you treat you, every single day, in every single choice.